The security cameras at First National Bank were recording in 4K when Brad Thompson's hands first made contact with Detective Maya Washington's shoulders. The inheritance check, worth more than Brad's annual salary, was already fluttering toward the marble floor as she spoke the words that would end his career. "You need to call Captain Elena Martinez right now." "I don't care what badge you think you have," Brad screamed, slamming Maya's back against the ATM wall with enough force to crack the screen. The legitimate bank documents scattered across the polished floor as premium customers began pulling out their phones. "This check is fraudulent. You people always think—" That's when Brad Thompson made his fatal mistake. He grabbed Maya's arm, yanking her away from the wall as she tried to reach for her detective badge. The pain shot through her shoulder as he forced her toward the floor, attempting to pin her arms behind her back. "You're under citizen's arrest until the real police get here." But what Brad Thompson didn't know was that Detective Maya Washington had been banking at this same branch for 3 years. What he didn't know was that the fraudulent check was a legitimate inheritance processed by the bank's own estate department. And what he definitely didn't know was that his assault on a decorated detective was being recorded by 12 different customers who recognized exactly what they were witnessing. The next 85 minutes would destroy everything. Into First National Bank that Tuesday afternoon with one simple goal: deposit her grandmother's inheritance check and finally buy her first home. At 28, she was one of the youngest detectives in the Metropolitan Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, with a spotless record and 3 commendations for excellence. The marble lobby gleamed under afternoon sunlight, streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Maya approached the premium banking counter, her navy blazer professional but unremarkable, the folded check in her leather portfolio representing 2 generations of her family's sacrifices. She had no idea that Brad Thompson had been watching her from the moment she entered. 23 years of bank security had warped Brad's perception of reality. In his mind, young black women didn't belong at premium banking counters. They didn't carry inheritance checks worth 6 figures, and they certainly didn't deserve the respect he reserved for the bank's legitimate clientele. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see multiple forms of identification." Brad's voice cut through the quiet banking atmosphere, loud enough to draw stares from other customers. Maya looked up from the deposit slip she'd been completing. "Of course. Here's my driver's license and the check, too. I need to verify the account information." Maya's training as a detective had taught her to recognize hostility, and Brad's tone carried something beyond professional caution. She handed over the inheritance check, watching his expression darken as he examined the amount. "This is suspicious," Brad announced, his voice now carrying across the entire lobby. "The account holder's age, the amount, your demographic profile. I'm calling this in as potential fraud." The words hit Maya like a physical blow. Around them, conversations stopped. Premium banking customers turned to stare. The teller behind the counter shifted uncomfortably, recognizing Maya as a regular customer, but uncertain how to intervene. "Sir, this is my grandmother's inheritance check," Maya said, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "Everything is legitimate, and I've been banking here for 3 years. Perhaps we could—" "Step away from the counter now." Brad's hand shot out, grabbing Maya's arm with shocking aggression. "I don't want to hear your story." That's when the situation exploded into violence. The sound of Maya's body hitting the ATM wall echoed through the marble lobby like a gunshot. Customers gasped, phones appeared in hands, and the careful veneer of civilized banking shattered in an instant. If you believe no one should suffer discrimination like this, type justice below. "You're under citizen's arrest for bank fraud," Brad screamed, his face flushed with adrenaline and misplaced authority. He grabbed Maya's other arm, attempting to force the trained detective to the ground in full view of dozens of witnesses. Maya's professional training warred with her human instincts. Every fiber of her being wanted to use her defensive tactics training to end this humiliation, but she also knew that fighting back would only escalate the situation and potentially validate Brad's assumptions about her character. Instead, she chose a different kind of power. "You need to call Captain Elena Martinez at Metro PD," Maya said, her voice cutting through Brad's shouting with deadly calm. "Tell her that Detective Maya Washington needs immediate backup." The words hit Brad like cold water. For just a moment, his grip loosened, uncertainty flickering across his face. But his prejudices ran too deep, and his commitment to his mistake was too complete. "I don't care who you think you know," he screamed, pressing her harder against the ATM. "This card is stolen. You people always have some story, some connection you think will save you." The corporate credit card, Maya's legitimate Metro PD purchasing card, scattered across the marble floor, joining the inheritance check in a symbolic pile of dismissed evidence. Around them, the bank's carefully maintained atmosphere of discretion and professionalism dissolved into chaos. Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, a 73-year-old retired teacher who had been waiting to speak with her financial advisor, pulled out her iPhone and began recording. She recognized injustice when she saw it, and she was determined to document every second. "This is wrong," she announced to the customers around her, her voice carrying the authority of decades spent managing unruly classrooms. "That young woman has done nothing but try to conduct legitimate banking business." Other customers began pulling out their phones. Within seconds, 4 different live streams were broadcasting the assault to Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. The hashtag #AnsBankingWhileBlack began trending before Brad had even realized the magnitude of his mistake. James Morrison, a corporate lawyer who had been Maya's Financial Crimes Unit's consultant on 3 major cases, stood in the premium banking area watching the assault with growing horror. He recognized Maya immediately. He had worked with her on the Riverside investment fraud case just 6 months earlier. "Stop!" James shouted, stepping forward with his phone already recording. "That woman is Detective Maya Washington with Metro PD Financial Crimes. You're assaulting a police officer." But Brad Thompson was too far gone to listen to reason. He grabbed Maya's wrist, twisting it behind her back as she tried to reach for her badge wallet. The pain shot through her shoulder as he slammed her chest first against the ATM again, the machine's screen finally cracking under the impact. "You're all part of this," Brad screamed at the gathering crowd. "She's got all of you fooled, but I know fraud when I see it." That's when Maya Washington made a decision that would change everything. Instead of resisting, instead of fighting back, instead of using her training to end the assault, she looked directly into Mrs. Hartwell's recording phone and spoke with the calm authority of someone who had testified in dozens of courtrooms. "My name is Detective Maya Washington, badge number 4427, Metro PD Financial Crimes Unit. I am being assaulted while attempting to conduct legitimate banking business at First National Bank. The check being questioned is a legitimate inheritance processed by this bank's own estate department. The credit card on the floor is issued by the Metropolitan Police Department." Her voice carried across the lobby with perfect clarity, ensuring that every recording device captured every word. "I am choosing not to resist this assault because I believe in the power of truth and the justice system I have sworn to protect. What you're witnessing is not just an attack on me personally, but an attack on the principles of equality and justice that define our society." The lobby fell silent, except for the sound of Brad's heavy breathing and the quiet hum of phone cameras recording. Maya looked directly at Brad, her voice now carrying a different kind of authority. "Mr. Thompson, you have 10 seconds to release me before this becomes a felony assault on a police officer. Your choice." 10 seconds stretched into an eternity. Brad Thompson's hands trembled against Maya's wrists as the reality of his situation began to penetrate his rage-clouded mind. Around them, 12 phones continued recording, and the silence in the lobby grew thick with tension. "Call Captain Elena Martinez," Maya repeated, her voice now carrying the unmistakable authority of law enforcement. "Metropolitan Police Department, Financial Crimes Division. Her direct line is on the business card in my badge wallet." Bank manager Patricia Wells finally emerged from her office, drawn by the commotion that was destroying her branch's reputation in real time. She took one look at the scene, a security guard restraining a customer against a damaged ATM while a crowd of premium clients recorded everything, and knew her career was about to be defined by the next 60 seconds. "Brad, release her immediately!" Patricia's voice cracked like a whip across the lobby. "Ma'am, this woman is attempting to commit fraud with a suspicious check and stolen credit card," Brad replied, but his voice lacked the conviction it had carried moments earlier. Patricia Wells had been managing this branch for 8 years. She recognized Maya Washington as one of their most valued customers, a woman who had banked with them for 3 years without a single irregularity. She also recognized the inheritance check. Her own estate services department had processed it just 48 hours earlier. Brad, that is Detective Maya Washington. She has been a customer here for 3 years. That check was processed by our own estate department, and if you don't release her immediately, you're going to jail. The words hit Brad like physical blows. His grip loosened involuntarily, and Maya stepped away from the ATM, straightening her blazer with the dignity of someone who had never lost control of the situation, even while being assaulted. She reached into her badge wallet and pulled out a business card, handing it to Patricia. "Please call Captain Elena Martinez immediately. Tell her that Detective Washington has been assaulted while conducting personal banking business, and that the incident has been recorded by multiple witnesses." Patricia's hands shook as she dialed the number. Around them, the crowd of customers remained frozen, phones still recording, sensing that they were witnessing something that would have consequences far beyond this moment. The phone rang twice before a crisp voice answered. "Captain Martinez, Financial Crimes." "Captain Martinez, this is Patricia Wells, branch manager at First National Bank downtown. I need to report an incident involving Detective Maya Washington. Is she injured?" The captain's voice sharpened immediately. "She was assaulted by our security guard while attempting to deposit a legitimate inheritance check. The entire incident was recorded by multiple customers. She's requesting immediate backup." The silence on the other end of the line lasted exactly 3 seconds. When Captain Martinez spoke again, her voice carried the cold fury of a supervisor whose officer had been attacked. "I'm dispatching units immediately. Secure the scene, preserve all surveillance footage, and ensure that every witness remains available for statements. If anyone attempts to leave before my officers arrive, consider it obstruction of justice." Patricia hung up and looked around the lobby at the faces staring back at her. Premium customers worth millions in deposits, their phones still recording, their expressions ranging from shock to disgust to righteous anger. She looked at Brad Thompson, who was now standing motionless beside the damaged ATM, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake. "Brad, you're suspended immediately pending a full investigation. Remove your security badge and wait in my office." "Ma'am, I was just doing my job." You thought a decorated police detective was committing fraud while depositing an inheritance check processed by our own estate department." Patricia cut him off. "What you thought is going to cost this bank millions in lawsuits and destroy whatever remains of our reputation." Maya Washington stood in the center of the lobby, surrounded by concerned customers and bank employees, her professional composure intact despite the ordeal. She looked at Mrs. Hartwell, who was still recording. "Ma'am, I want to thank you and everyone else who documented this incident. Your willingness to stand up for what's right makes all the difference." Mrs. Hartwell lowered her phone and stepped forward. "My dear, I've been teaching children for 50 years and I know injustice when I see it. What happened to you today was wrong, and I'm going to make sure the whole world sees this video." James Morrison approached Maya, his corporate lawyer instincts already analyzing the legal implications of what he'd witnessed. "Detective Washington, I'm James Morrison. We worked together on the Riverside case. I recorded the entire incident from multiple angles. Whatever you need for the investigation, you have my complete support." Maya nodded gratefully. "Mr. Morrison, thank you. This situation is going to require careful documentation and witness coordination." Outside, the sound of approaching sirens began to penetrate the bank's thick windows. Captain Elena Martinez was not the type of supervisor who sent subordinates to handle an assault on one of her officers. She was coming personally with backup, and with the full authority of the Metropolitan Police Department behind her. Brad Thompson stood frozen beside the damaged ATM, staring at the inheritance check and police credit card scattered on the marble floor, finally understanding that his prejudices had led him to assault a decorated police detective in front of dozens of witnesses with recording devices. The next 70 minutes would unravel not just his career, but an entire system of institutional discrimination that had been hiding in plain sight for years. The sirens grew louder, echoing off the glass facades of downtown's financial district. Inside First National Bank, an unlikely community had formed around Maya Washington. Premium customers, bank employees, and random witnesses united by their shared experience of witnessing injustice. Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell had become the unofficial leader of the witness group. Her Facebook livestream had attracted over 1,500 viewers, with comments pouring in from across the country expressing outrage and support. She read some of them aloud to the gathering crowd. "This is exactly what systemic racism looks like," she read from her phone. "Thank you for recording this. The world needs to see. Is there a GoFundMe for this detective? Just I'm sharing this everywhere." David Chen, a software engineer who had been waiting to open a business account, held up his phone showing his TikTok video of the incident. 2 million views in 20 minutes, he announced. The hashtag #BankingWhileBlack is trending nationally. Maya felt a mix of gratitude and discomfort at the viral attention, but she understood its importance. "The visibility matters," she told the group. "Incidents like this happen every day, but most of them aren't recorded by 12 different people. Your documentation could prevent this from happening to someone else." Bank teller Jennifer Lopez approached Maya hesitantly. She had processed Maya's transactions for 3 years. Watching her professional demeanor, her patient interactions with staff, her consistent banking patterns that spoke to financial stability and reliability. "Detective Washington, I'm so sorry this happened," Jennifer said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been serving you for 3 years. I know who you are. I know your banking history, and I know that check was legitimate." "I should have spoken up immediately." Maya placed a gentle hand on Jennifer's shoulder. "You're speaking up now, that's what matters. Can you provide a statement about my banking history when the investigators arrive?" "Absolutely. I have access to your complete transaction history. 3 years of consistent deposits, professional references, government payroll, direct deposits. Anyone who looked at your account for 5 seconds would know you're exactly who you say you are." Patricia Wells, the branch manager, was already on her second phone call with corporate headquarters. The conversation was not going well. "Yes, sir, I understand the liability implications," she said into her office phone, visible through the glass partition. "No, sir. There was no justification for the security guard's actions." "Yes, sir. The entire incident was live-streamed on multiple platforms." "Yes, sir. Detective Washington is a valued customer with a 3-year banking relationship." Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, black and white police cruisers were pulling up to the bank's main entrance. Captain Elena Martinez emerged from the lead vehicle with the bearing of someone who had spent 25 years commanding respect in rooms full of people who underestimated her authority. She was followed by Detective Sergeant Mike Rodriguez from Internal Affairs, Detective Lisa Park from the Financial Crimes Unit, and Officer Marcus Johnson, who served as the department's community liaison specialist. Maya watched her colleagues approach through the glass doors and felt a wave of professional pride, mixed with personal gratitude. Captain Martinez had assembled exactly the right team to handle this incident with the thoroughness and sensitivity it deserved. "The Detective Washington," Captain Martinez's voice carried across the lobby as she entered, her presence immediately commanding attention from everyone in the space. She surveyed the scene with the analytical eye of an investigator, taking in the damaged ATM, the scattered documents, and the crowd of witnesses still holding phones. "Captain," Maya replied, stepping forward with the professionalism that had defined her career. "I'm uninjured, and we have comprehensive documentation of the incident from multiple witnesses." Captain Martinez nodded, then looked around the lobby at the assembled customers and bank employees. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Captain Elena Martinez with the Metropolitan Police Department. I understand that many of you witnessed an assault on one of my officers while she was conducting personal banking business. I want to thank you for your intervention and documentation." She gestured to Detective Park and Officer Johnson. "My colleagues will be taking individual statements from each of you. Your witness testimony will be crucial for ensuring that justice is served and that this type of incident is prevented in the future." Mrs. Hartwell stepped forward, her phone still recording. "Captain, I want you to know that every person in this lobby stood up for Detective Washington. This wasn't just an attack on her. It was an attack on all of us who believe in treating people with dignity and respect." Ma'am, your courage in documenting this incident may have prevented a much worse outcome, Captain Martinez replied. I'd like to start by getting your complete video recording into evidence. James Morrison approached with his corporate lawyer briefcase and business card. Captain Martinez, I'm James Morrison, legal counsel. I've worked with Detective Washington on multiple financial crimes cases. I recorded the incident from beginning to end, and I can provide legal consultation pro bono for any civil rights violations that may have occurred. Captain Martinez accepted his business card. Mr. Morrison, your professional relationship with Detective Washington adds important context to this case. Detective Park will coordinate with you on evidence submission. Across the lobby, Brad Thompson emerged from the branch manager's office, no longer wearing his security badge, his face pale with the growing realization of what he had done. He looked around the lobby at the assembled crowd, the police officers, the phone still recording and the inheritance check and police credit card still scattered on the marble floor. Captain Martinez followed Maya's gaze to Brad and spoke in a voice that carried across the entire lobby. Mr. Thompson, you are under arrest for assault in the third degree, attempted false imprisonment and civil rights violations under federal statute. You have the right to remain silent. The Miranda rights echoed through the marble lobby as handcuffs clicked into place, recorded by a dozen phones and witnessed by customers whose initial shock was transforming into a shared understanding that they had witnessed something significant. But what none of them knew yet was that Brad Thompson's assault on Detective Maya Washington was about to expose a systematic pattern of discrimination that extended far beyond one security guard's prejudices. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the marble lobby as Brad Thompson's wrists were secured behind his back. Detective Sergeant Mike Rodriguez read the Miranda rights with the practiced cadence of someone who had made hundreds of arrests, but Maya could see in his expression that this case was different. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Brad's face had gone completely pale, the full weight of his situation finally penetrating his consciousness. He looked around the lobby at the dozen phones still recording, at the premium customers whose respect he had desperately sought through violence, at Detective Maya Washington standing with quiet dignity beside her commanding officer. I thought she was committing fraud, Brad stammered as the handcuffs locked into place. The amount of the check, the way she... I was just doing my job. Your job, Captain Martinez replied with icy precision, was to provide security for legitimate banking customers. Your job was not to assault decorated police officers based on racial profiling. Your job was not to ignore basic banking procedures and attack customers conducting legitimate business. Patricia Wells approached the group, her hands shaking as she held a manila folder. Captain Martinez, I have Detective Washington's complete banking history here. 3 years of professional interactions, government payroll deposits, excellent credit standing, 0 irregularities of any kind. She opened the folder and pulled out the documentation. The inheritance check that Mr. Thompson deemed suspicious was processed by our own estate services department 48 hours ago. The credit card he claimed was stolen is issued directly by the Metropolitan Police Department. Any basic verification would have confirmed Detective Washington's identity and the legitimacy of her transactions. Captain Martinez accepted the documents and looked at Brad Thompson. Mr. Thompson, you assaulted a police officer because you assumed a young black woman couldn't legitimately possess an inheritance check. You ignored banking procedures, dismissed witness testimony, and escalated a routine transaction into a federal crime. Detective Park stepped forward with her evidence collection kit. Mr. Thompson, I need to photograph your hands for evidence of the assault. The scratches and marks on Detective Washington's arms will need to be documented and matched to your grip patterns. As Detective Park photographed Brad's hands, Mrs. Hartwell approached Captain Martinez with her phone. Captain, I want to make sure you have access to my complete Facebook Live recording. It shows the entire incident from multiple angles, and it's been viewed by over 50,000 people in the last hour. Mrs. Hartwell, your documentation is crucial evidence, Captain Martinez replied. Officer Johnson will coordinate with you to ensure we have copies of all recordings from all witnesses. David Chen held up his phone, showing his TikTok metrics. Captain, my video has been shared over 10,000 times. The comments are, well, they're not supportive of Mr. Thompson's actions. James Morrison opened his briefcase and pulled out a business card holder. Captain Martinez, as legal counsel, I want to ensure that Detective Washington's civil rights are fully protected throughout this process. What happened here today constitutes a clear violation of federal civil rights statutes. Maya had remained quietly professional throughout the arrest, but she finally spoke up. Captain, while I appreciate everyone's support, I want to ensure that this incident is investigated thoroughly, not just for my sake, but to prevent it from happening to other customers who might not have the protection of a badge. Captain Martinez nodded approvingly. Detective Washington, your professionalism throughout this ordeal reflects the highest standards of our department. And you're absolutely right. This investigation needs to examine whether this was an isolated incident or part of a larger pattern. She turned to Patricia Wells. Ms. Wells, I'm going to need access to all security footage from the past 6 months, all incident reports involving customer complaints about security procedures, and all training materials provided to your security staff. Patricia's face went even paler. Captain, I'll provide whatever you need, but I should mention that our security services are provided by an outside contractor. Brad works for Sentinel Security Services, not directly for the bank. This information made Detective Park look up from her evidence collection. Captain, if this involves a security contracting company, we might be looking at systematic training issues rather than individual bias. Captain Martinez's expression sharpened. Detective Park, contact Sentinel Security Services immediately. I want to know how many locations they service, what their training protocols include, and whether there have been similar incidents at other client sites. She looked around the lobby at the assembled witnesses, the bank employees, and the documentation that had already been collected. Ladies and gentlemen, what you witnessed today and your willingness to document it may have prevented a much larger injustice. Your testimony will ensure that Detective Washington receives the justice she deserves. Maya stepped forward. Captain, I'd like to add something for the record and for everyone who recorded this incident. She looked directly at Mrs. Hartwell's phone, which was still broadcasting live to thousands of viewers. My name is Detective Maya Washington, and I've served the Metropolitan Police Department with pride for 6 years. What happened to me today happens to people every day. People who don't have badges, people who don't have witnesses with cameras, people whose voices aren't heard when they're victimized by systematic discrimination. Her voice carried across the lobby and through the live streams to audiences across the country. I was assaulted today because someone made assumptions about my character, my legitimacy, and my right to conduct business based purely on my race. But I was also protected today because 12 strangers with smartphones decided that injustice was worth documenting and confronting. She looked around the lobby at the faces of the witnesses who had stood up for her. The real heroes today are the customers and employees who could have stayed silent, who could have minded their own business, who could have assumed that someone else would handle it. Instead, you chose to act. You chose to record. You chose to speak up. And your choices are going to prevent this from happening to someone else. Outside, a news van from Channel 7 was pulling up to the bank's entrance. Word of the viral videos had reached the media, and Maya Washington's assault was about to become a national story. But what the reporters didn't know yet was that Detective Maya Washington's case was about to uncover a systematic pattern of discrimination that extended across hundreds of businesses and affected thousands of victims. Comment your country and city. Let's see where justice is being celebrated around the world. 3 hours after Brad Thompson's arrest, Detective Lisa Park sat in a conference room at Metropolitan Police Headquarters with a manila folder that was growing thicker by the minute. The preliminary investigation into Sentinel Security Services had already uncovered information that transformed Maya's assault from an individual incident into something much larger and more disturbing. Captain, Detective Park announced as she entered Captain Martinez's office, we've got a problem, a big one. Captain Martinez looked up from her computer, where she had been reviewing the viral videos of Maya's assault. The hashtag #StreamBankingWhileBlack was now trending internationally, with over 2 million posts in the past 4 hours. What did you find? Detective Park opened the folder and spread documents across the captain's desk. Sentinel Security Services has contracts with over 200 businesses across the metropolitan area. Banks, retail stores, office complexes, medical facilities. And in the past 18 months, they've had 47 complaints filed against their security personnel for discriminatory treatment of minority customers. Captain Martinez leaned forward, studying the documents. 47 complaints. Why wasn't this flagged earlier? Because the complaints were filed with individual businesses, not with us. Each company handled the incidents internally, usually with apologies and small settlements to avoid publicity. No one connected the pattern until we started investigating Sentinel's training protocols. Detective Park pulled out another document. Here's where it gets worse. Sentinel Security Services uses a training manual called Threat Assessment and Customer Profiling. That includes sections on identifying suspicious behavior patterns that are essentially racial profiling guidelines disguised as security protocols. She opened the training manual to a highlighted section. Listen to this. Young individuals from certain demographic backgrounds may exhibit confidence levels inconsistent with their legitimate purchasing power. Security personnel should trust their instincts when customer behavior, appearance, or demographic profile suggests potential fraudulent activity. Captain Martinez's jaw tightened as she read the highlighted passages. This is systematic discrimination codified into corporate training. How many businesses are using these protocols? That's what we're trying to determine. But, Captain, it gets worse. Sentinel Security Services is owned by a larger corporation called Guardian Business Solutions, which provides not just security services, but also employee training, customer service protocols, and loss prevention strategies to over 1,500 businesses nationwide. The implications hit Captain Martinez immediately. We're not looking at isolated incidents of individual bias. We're looking at systematic, corporate-sponsored discrimination affecting thousands of customers across hundreds of businesses. Detective Park nodded grimly. And Maya's case is about to expose all of it. Maya Washington entered the conference room, having changed from her bank clothes into her standard detective attire. Despite the ordeal she had experienced, her professional demeanor remained intact, though Captain Martinez could see the weight of the day's events in her posture. "Maya, how are you holding up?" "I'm fine, Captain. But I've been thinking about what happened today, and I want to be involved in this investigation. Not as a victim, but as a detective. If what happened to me is happening to other people, I want to help stop it." Captain Martinez gestured for Maya to sit down. "Maya, you can't investigate your own case, but what you can do is help us understand the broader implications of what we're uncovering." She showed Maya the training documents Detective Park had discovered. Sentinel Security Services has been systematically training their personnel to profile customers based on race and demographic assumptions. Your assault wasn't the result of one guard's individual prejudice. It was the predictable outcome of corporate-sponsored discrimination training. Maya read through the training manual excerpts, her expression growing more serious with each paragraph. "Captain, this explains everything. Brad Thompson didn't just wake up this morning and decide to assault a customer. He was following protocols that trained him to view people like me as inherently suspicious." "Exactly. And we need to find out how many other businesses are using similar training protocols, how many other customers have been victimized, and how deep this systematic discrimination extends." Detective Park pulled out her phone and showed them a social media feed. Maya's videos are triggering responses from across the country. People are sharing their own stories of discrimination at banks, stores, restaurants, medical facilities, all involving security personnel who made assumptions based on race and demographic profiling. She scrolled through dozens of comments and responses. "Look at this. The same thing happened to me at Citizens Bank in Chicago. I was tackled by security at Nordstrom for shopping while black. They called police on me at the hospital emergency room because they assumed I was a drug seeker." Maya leaned over to read the comments, her professional training analyzing the patterns. "Captain, these aren't isolated incidents. Look at the consistency of the experiences. The similarity of the language used by security personnel, the predictable escalation from suspicion to accusation to physical confrontation. That's exactly what we're seeing, Captain Martinez agreed. And that's why this case is being transferred to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The conference room fell silent. Maya looked up from the social media feed. FBI? Maya, what happened to you today was a federal civil rights violation. But more importantly, what we're uncovering appears to be a systematic conspiracy to violate the civil rights of thousands of people across multiple states. That makes it a federal case. Detective Park closed the folder. Special Agent Jennifer Walsh from the FBI's Civil Rights Division is arriving tomorrow morning to take over the investigation. But Maya, they're going to want your complete cooperation, as both a victim and as a law enforcement professional who can help them understand the scope of what we're dealing with. Maya nodded, understanding the gravity of what she was hearing. Captain, when I walked into that bank this morning, I thought I was just depositing an inheritance check. I never imagined that Brad Thompson's assault would expose something this extensive. Maya, your professionalism under attack, your decision not to escalate the violence, and your clear communication to the witnesses made it possible for this investigation to uncover the truth. If you had fought back, if you had handled the situation differently, Brad Thompson would have been just another security guard who made a mistake, rather than evidence of systematic discrimination. Captain Martinez stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city where hundreds of businesses might be operating under discriminatory protocols disguised as security training. Maya, I want you to take tomorrow off. Rest, process what happened, and prepare for what's coming. Because when the FBI investigation goes public, you're going to become the face of a civil rights case that could change how businesses train their security personnel across the entire country. Maya stood up, gathering her composure and her professional resolve. Captain, I didn't ask to be the face of anything. But if my experience can prevent what happened to me from happening to someone else, then I'm ready for whatever comes next. Outside headquarters, news vans from 3 television networks were setting up for evening broadcasts. The story of Detective Maya Washington's assault at First National Bank was about to become a national conversation about systematic discrimination, corporate accountability, and the power of witnesses with smartphones to document injustice in real time. But what none of them knew yet was that Maya's case would eventually lead to federal indictments, corporate restructuring, and policy changes affecting security training at over 1,500 businesses nationwide. Special Agent Jennifer Walsh arrived at Metropolitan Police Headquarters at 8:00 a.m. sharp, carrying a briefcase that contained 6 months of preliminary FBI research into Guardian Business Solutions and its network of subsidiary companies. She had been investigating systematic civil rights violations in the private security industry for 3 years, and Detective Maya Washington's case represented the breakthrough she had been waiting for. Detective Washington. Agent Walsh extended her hand as Maya entered the FBI field office conference room. I want to thank you for your courage yesterday and your willingness to cooperate with our expanded investigation. Maya accepted the handshake, noting the agent's direct manner and the extensive documentation already spread across the conference table. Agent Walsh, I'm committed to ensuring that what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else. Agent Walsh gestured to the documents. Detective Washington, what you experienced yesterday was not an isolated incident. It was the predictable result of systematic discrimination training provided by Guardian Business Solutions to security contractors across 43 states. She opened a thick folder labeled Pattern Recognition Analysis and pulled out a map of the United States covered with red dots. Each of these dots represents a documented incident of discriminatory treatment by security personnel trained through Guardian's network. In the past 24 months, we've identified over 1,200 cases. Maya studied the map, her detective training analyzing the distribution patterns. Agent Walsh, the concentration is highest in urban areas with significant minority populations. That's not coincidental. Exactly. Guardian Business Solutions specifically targets markets where their threat assessment training will generate the most incidents. They profit from systematic discrimination by positioning it as enhanced security. Here's their internal marketing materials. They promise clients reduced theft, improved customer behavior, and enhanced loss prevention through advanced demographic risk assessment. Agent Walsh pulled out another document showing Guardian's corporate structure. Detective Washington, Guardian Business Solutions operates through 17 subsidiary companies, each specializing in different aspects of what they call behavioral security. They train security personnel, customer service representatives, and even medical staff to identify high-risk individuals based on demographic profiling. Maya studied the organizational chart, her detective instincts recognizing the sophisticated nature of the operation. Agent Walsh, this isn't just discrimination. This is a systematic conspiracy to violate civil rights while generating corporate profits. Exactly. And your case gives us the evidence we need to bring federal charges under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Fair Housing Act, and the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. Agent Walsh opened her laptop and showed Maya a spreadsheet containing hundreds of names. These are victims we've already identified through social media responses to your viral videos. People who experience similar discrimination at businesses using Guardian's training protocols. She scrolled through the entries. Dr. Patricia Williams, cardiac surgeon detained by hospital security while trying to enter the OR because they assumed she was an intruder. Michael Chen, software engineer, tackled by mall security for suspicious loitering while waiting for his girlfriend. Sarah Johnson, college professor, arrested at her own bank for attempting to deposit her paycheck. Maya felt a mix of anger and determination as she read through the cases. Agent Walsh, how many of these victims filed official complaints? Less than 20%. Most assumed it was an isolated incident, or they were intimidated by the business's legal teams into accepting small settlements in exchange for silence. Agent Walsh pulled out a recording device. Detective Washington, I'd like to record your complete statement about yesterday's incident, but I also want to discuss your role in the broader investigation. Maya straightened in her chair, her professional training taking over. What kind of role? We're going to offer immunity deals to security personnel who cooperate with our investigation. We need someone from law enforcement who understands both sides of this situation, someone who has experienced the discrimination but also understands the pressures and training that led to it. Maya considered the proposal carefully. You want me to interview the security guards who assaulted other victims? Among other things, yes. Your unique perspective as both a victim and a law enforcement professional could help us understand how widespread this training has become and how many businesses are unknowingly perpetuating systematic discrimination. Agent Walsh closed her laptop and looked directly at Maya. Detective Washington, I need you to understand the scope of what we're dealing with. If our investigation confirms what we suspect, we could be looking at the largest civil rights case in the private sector since the 1960s. Maya absorbed the magnitude of the situation. Agent Walsh, yesterday I thought I was a victim of one security guard's prejudice. Today you're telling me I was the victim of a systematic conspiracy involving hundreds of businesses and thousands of trained personnel. That's exactly what I'm telling you. And your professionalism under attack, combined with the comprehensive documentation by witnesses, has given us the evidence we need to expose the entire system. Agent Walsh stood up and walked to a whiteboard covered with photographs, documents, and connecting lines that mapped Guardian Business Solutions network. Detective Washington, we're going to dismantle this entire operation. We're going to prosecute the executives who designed these discriminatory training programs. We're going to force policy changes at hundreds of businesses. And we're going to ensure that victims receive the justice they deserve. Maya looked at the investigation board, seeing her own photograph connected to dozens of other cases through red lines indicating systematic patterns. Agent Walsh, I'm ready to do whatever is necessary to stop this from happening to anyone else. Good. Because tomorrow we're executing search warrants at Guardian Business Solutions headquarters, and we're going to need you there to help us understand what we find. Outside the FBI field office, news crews from national television networks were setting up for live broadcasts. The story of Detective Maya Washington's assault was evolving into something much larger, a federal investigation into systematic civil rights violations that could reshape how American businesses train their personnel. But neither Maya nor Agent Walsh knew that their investigation was about to uncover evidence of discriminatory practices affecting over 50,000 customers across 1,500 businesses nationwide. At 6 a.m. the next morning, Maya Washington stood in the parking lot of Guardian Business Solutions corporate headquarters, watching FBI agents prepare to execute search warrants that would expose one of the largest systematic discrimination conspiracies in American corporate history. Special Agent Walsh approached her with a bulletproof vest and FBI identification. "Detective Washington, you're here as a law enforcement consultant, not as a victim. Your role is to help us identify evidence of discriminatory training protocols and to interview personnel who might cooperate with our investigation." Maya accepted the vest, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with representing thousands of victims who had experienced similar discrimination. "Agent Walsh, what exactly are we looking for?" "Training materials, internal communications, financial records showing how they profit from discrimination, and most importantly, evidence of how widespread their influence has become." The Guardian Business Solutions building was a sleek, modern corporate complex that projected an image of professionalism and respectability. Nothing about its exterior suggested that it housed the headquarters of a systematic civil rights violation conspiracy. Agent Walsh signaled to her team, and 26 FBI agents approached the building's main entrance. Maya followed, her detective training analyzing the corporate environment that had systematically trained people to discriminate against individuals like herself. The receptionist's face went pale as FBI agents filled the lobby, displaying search warrants and federal identification. "Ma'am, we're executing federal search warrants for all premises, computer systems and corporate records," Agent Walsh announced. "All personnel are to remain in designated areas while the search is conducted." Maya observed the employees' reactions as FBI agents spread throughout the building. Some appeared genuinely shocked, while others seemed to understand exactly why federal investigators were there. In the executive conference room, Maya and Agent Walsh found exactly what they were looking for. A presentation titled "Maximizing Security Efficiency Through Advanced Customer Profiling" that had been delivered to over 400 client businesses. Agent Walsh photographed each slide as Maya read the content aloud for the record. Slide 12. Statistical correlation between demographic indicators and security incidents allows trained personnel to focus attention on high-probability threats. Slide 15. Confident behavior inconsistent with demographic expectations often indicates fraudulent or criminal intent. Maya felt a mixture of professional disgust and personal anger as she read the systematically codified prejudice. "Agent Walsh, this isn't security training. This is discrimination training disguised as professional development." They found email communications between Guardian executives discussing their demographic risk assessment training programs. One email from the CEO to the head of training read, "Our clients are seeing 47% reduction in incidents since implementing our advanced profiling protocols. The key is training personnel to trust their instincts about customer demographics." In the training department, FBI agents discovered video recordings of actual training sessions where security personnel were taught to identify suspicious customers based on race, age, and economic assumptions. Maya watched one training video where an instructor told a room full of security guards, "If a young person from certain backgrounds displays confidence levels inconsistent with their likely economic status, that's your first red flag. Trust your gut instincts about who belongs in your establishment." "Agent Walsh, this is exactly the training that led Brad Thompson to assault me," Maya said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "This video explains his entire thought process. He was trained to view my confidence and the inheritance check as evidence of criminal activity." Agent Walsh nodded grimly. "Detective Washington, we're finding evidence that Guardian has trained over 12,000 security personnel using these protocols, and we're about to discover how many of them have acted on this training." In the company's database servers, FBI computer specialists were uncovering incident reports filed by Guardian-trained security personnel at client businesses. The reports used coded language to describe confrontations with customers But the patterns were unmistakable. Maya read through dozens of incident reports that described scenarios identical to her own experience. Agent Walsh, look at the consistency of the language. Customer displayed suspicious confidence levels. Individual's demographic profile inconsistent with transaction type. Subject exhibited entitled behavior, typical of fraudulent actors. Agent Walsh was documenting financial records that showed Guardian Business Solutions had generated over $40 million in revenue from their advanced security training programs. Detective Washington, they weren't just systematically violating civil rights, they were profiting from it on a massive scale. As the search continued, Guardian's CEO Richard Blackwood arrived at the building with a team of corporate lawyers. His confident stride faltered when he saw FBI agents carrying boxes of evidence from his company's offices. Agent Walsh approached him with federal credentials and Miranda rights. "Mr. Blackwood, you're under arrest for conspiracy to violate civil rights, wire fraud, and conducting a systematic pattern of discriminatory business practices." Maya watched as the man whose company had trained Brad Thompson to assault her was handcuffed and placed in the back of a federal vehicle. She felt a sense of professional satisfaction, seeing justice applied to the source of systematic discrimination rather than just its individual manifestations. But what Maya didn't know yet was that Richard Blackwood's arrest was just the beginning. The FBI's investigation was about to reveal that Guardian Business Solutions was part of a larger network of companies that had been systematically violating civil rights across multiple industries for over a decade. As news crews arrived to cover the federal raid, Maya realized that her assault at First National Bank had exposed a conspiracy that extended far beyond anything she could have imagined when she walked into the bank to deposit her grandmother's inheritance check. 3 days after the FBI raid, Maya Washington sat in a secure conference room at the Department of Justice, reviewing evidence that revealed the true scope of the discrimination conspiracy she had unknowingly exposed. Deputy Attorney General Sandra Chen placed a thick folder on the table in front of Maya and Agent Walsh. "Detective Washington, what began as your assault case has uncovered the largest systematic civil rights violation in the private sector since the civil rights era." Maya opened the folder to find organizational charts, financial records, and communication logs that mapped a network of companies working together to systematically discriminate against minority customers while generating massive corporate profits. "Ma'am, how extensive is this network?" Deputy Attorney General Chen pulled out a map of the United States, covered with interconnected lines. Guardian Business Solutions is owned by Strategic Advantage Corporation, which owns 17 other companies, providing security, training, and loss prevention services to over 1,500 businesses across all 50 states. Agent Walsh added another document to the stack. "Detective Washington, we've identified over 50,000 documented incidents of discrimination by personnel trained through this network. Your case at First National Bank was just one example of a systematic pattern that has been operating for 12 years. Maya studied the evidence, her detective training analyzing the sophisticated conspiracy. Deputy Attorney General Chen, this isn't just discrimination. This is organized civil rights violations operated as a for-profit business model. Exactly. Strategic Advantage Corporation has been selling discrimination as enhanced security to businesses that want to reduce what they call undesirable customer demographics without explicitly violating civil rights laws. Deputy Attorney General Chen opened her laptop and showed Maya internal communications between Strategic Advantage executives. Listen to this email from their CEO to regional directors. Our demographic profiling training continues to exceed client expectations. Businesses report significant reductions in minority customer complaints and increased comfort levels among preferred demographic groups. Maya felt sick reading the clinical language used to describe systematic racism. They were measuring their success by how effectively they could discriminate against people like me. Agent Walsh pulled out financial records that showed the true scale of the operation. Detective Washington's Strategic Advantage Corporation generated over $200 million in revenue last year from their behavioral security programs. They were profiting from civil rights violations on an industrial scale. How many people have been affected by this? Deputy Attorney General Chen consulted her notes. Based on our preliminary investigation, we estimate that over 500,000 Americans have experienced discriminatory treatment from personnel trained by Strategic Advantage's network. And that's just the cases we can document. Maya absorbed the staggering numbers. Deputy Attorney General Chen, when Brad Thompson assaulted me at the bank, I thought I was dealing with one person's prejudice. Now you're telling me that his actions were the result of a corporate conspiracy involving hundreds of companies and millions of dollars in profit. That's exactly what we're telling you. And that's why the Department of Justice is filing federal charges under the Civil Rights Act, the RICO Act, and federal conspiracy statutes. Agent Walsh pulled out a list of defendants that was 12 pages long. Detective Washington, we're charging 47 executives and managers with conspiracy to violate civil rights. We're also charging Strategic Advantage Corporation and its 17 subsidiary companies with systematic discrimination under federal law. Maya looked at the list, recognizing some of the companies as major national brands she had interacted with throughout her life. Agent Walsh, some of these companies trained personnel who interacted with me at hospitals, retail stores, even government buildings. How was this allowed to operate for 12 years without being discovered? Deputy Attorney General Chen leaned forward, because each individual incident appeared to be isolated. Victims like you assumed they were experiencing personal prejudice, not systematic corporate policy. The companies settled complaints quietly to avoid publicity, and no one connected the pattern until your viral videos triggered a national response. Agent Walsh showed Maya social media analytics from the past week. Your hashtag Merchant Banking While Black has generated over 15 million posts. Victims from across the country are sharing their stories, and we're identifying new cases every hour. Maya read through some of the responses on Agent Walsh's tablet. I was detained by security at Target for shopping while black. They called police on me at Starbucks for existing while black. I was refused service at a restaurant because they assumed I couldn't afford the bill. All of these businesses used Strategic Advantage's training programs. We're still investigating, but the preliminary evidence suggests that yes, most of these incidents involved personnel trained by Strategic Advantage or its subsidiary companies. Deputy Attorney General Chen stood up and walked to a whiteboard covered with photographs of victims who had come forward since Maya's videos went viral. Detective Washington, your professionalism under attack and your decision to speak clearly to the recording witnesses created a viral moment that gave victims across the country permission to share their own experiences. Maya looked at the photographs, hundreds of faces representing people who had experienced discrimination similar to her assault at First National Bank. Deputy Attorney General Chen, what happens next? Next, we prosecute the largest civil rights case in modern American history. We seek criminal charges against the executives who designed and implemented these discriminatory policies. We pursue civil remedies for the victims. And we force systematic changes to ensure this never happens again. Agent Walsh collected the documents and prepared to leave. Detective Washington, we're going to need your testimony at multiple trials, congressional hearings, and civil rights proceedings. Your case is going to become the foundation for prosecuting an entire network of systematic discrimination. Maya felt the weight of representing thousands of victims, but she also felt the strength that came from knowing that her ordeal would prevent others from experiencing similar injustice. Agent Walsh, I'm ready to do whatever is necessary to ensure that justice is served. As they left the Department of Justice building, Maya realized that her simple attempt to deposit an inheritance check had evolved into a federal case that would reshape how American businesses train their personnel and interact with minority customers. But she had no idea that the corporate conspiracy they had uncovered was about to reveal connections to discriminatory practices in industries ranging from healthcare to education to law enforcement itself. 2 weeks after the federal indictments were announced, Maya Washington found herself in a congressional hearing room, surrounded by dozens of other victims who had experienced discrimination from personnel trained by Strategic Advantage Corporation's network. Congressman Michael Torres, chair of the House Judiciary Committee's Civil Rights Subcommittee, called the hearing to order. We are here today to examine the systematic civil rights violations perpetrated by Strategic Advantage Corporation and its network of subsidiary companies, and to hear testimony from the Americans who were victimized by their discriminatory training programs. Maya sat at the witness table alongside Dr. Patricia Williams, the cardiac surgeon who had been detained while trying to enter her own operating room, Michael Chen, the software engineer who had been tackled at a shopping mall, and Sarah Johnson, the college professor who had been arrested at her own bank. Detective Washington, Congressman Torres began, your viral videos exposed this conspiracy to the American public. Can you describe how your professional training as a police officer helped you recognize the systematic nature of the discrimination you experienced? Maya leaned toward the microphone, her voice carrying the authority of her law enforcement experience. Congressman Torres, as a detective, I'm trained to identify patterns and connect seemingly isolated incidents. When I saw the viral response to my videos, I realized that Brad Thompson's assault wasn't the result of individual prejudice. It was the predictable outcome of systematic training designed to target people based on race and demographic assumptions. She gestured to the other witnesses. Every person at this table experienced remarkably similar discrimination. The language used by security personnel, the escalation patterns, the assumptions about our legitimacy, these weren't coincidences. They were the result of coordinated training programs that taught thousands of people to discriminate against us. Dr. Patricia Williams spoke next, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of her testimony. Congressman Torres, I have been a cardiac surgeon for 15 years. I have saved hundreds of lives, trained dozens of medical students, and earned the respect of colleagues across the country. But when I walked into my own hospital wearing scrubs and carrying my surgical kit, security personnel trained by Strategic Advantage assumed I was an intruder because a young black woman couldn't possibly be a heart surgeon. She pulled out photographs from the incident. They detained me for 45 minutes, while my patient waited in the operating room with a life-threatening condition. Their training taught them that my demographic profile was inconsistent with my professional role, so they ignored my medical credentials and treated me like a criminal. Michael Chen described his experience at the shopping mall, where he had been tackled by security while waiting for his girlfriend. The security guard told me that people like me didn't belong in the premium shopping area. When I showed him my software engineer business cards and explained that I was waiting for someone, he said my cover story was suspicious because my demographic didn't match the clientele they wanted to attract. Sarah Johnson, the college professor, shared her banking incident that was remarkably similar to Maya's experience. They questioned my paycheck deposit from the university, claimed that someone with my demographic profile couldn't legitimately earn a professor's salary, and called police when I insisted the deposit was legitimate. The bank had been my client for 8 years, but the security guard had been trained to view educated black women as inherently suspicious. Congressman Torres consulted his notes. According to the FBI's investigation, Strategic Advantage Corporation trained personnel at over 1,500 businesses using discriminatory profiling methods. Dr. Williams, can you describe the broader impact this has had on your professional life? Dr. Williams leaned forward, her surgical training evident in her precise, methodical response. Congressman Torres, the discrimination I experienced wasn't just personally humiliating, it affected patient care. The 45 minutes I spent detained by security could have cost my patient his life. And now I have to worry every time I enter a hospital, every time I interact with security personnel, every time I'm in a professional environment where someone might have been trained to view me as a threat rather than a colleague. Maya added her perspective as a law enforcement professional. Congressman Torres, as a detective, I interact with security personnel regularly as part of my job. Knowing that thousands of them have been trained to view people like me as inherently suspicious affects my ability to do my job effectively. When I'm investigating financial crimes, I now have to wonder whether the security guards at banks and businesses see me as a detective or as a potential criminal. The committee members asked detailed questions about the systematic nature of the discrimination, the corporate profits generated from civil rights violations, and the long-term impact on the victims. Congressman Elena Vasquez asked Maya, Detective Washington, What changes do you believe are necessary to prevent this type of systematic discrimination from occurring again? Maya had prepared extensively for this question. Congresswoman Vasquez, we need federal legislation requiring transparency in security training programs, mandatory civil rights education for all security personnel, and criminal penalties for executives who design or implement discriminatory training protocols. She pulled out her prepared recommendations. We also need a national database of discrimination incidents so that patterns can be identified before they become systematic conspiracies. And we need federal oversight of companies that provide security and customer service training to ensure their programs comply with civil rights laws. Dr. Williams added, we need accountability measures that make discrimination expensive for corporations, not profitable. Strategic Advantage made over $200 million from systematic civil rights violations. Until the financial penalties exceed the profits, companies will continue to violate our rights. The hearing continued for 6 hours, with testimony from federal investigators, civil rights attorneys, and additional victims who had traveled from across the country to share their experiences. As the session concluded, Congressman Torres addressed the witnesses directly. Detective Washington, Dr. Williams, Mr. Chen, Professor Johnson, and all the victims who have come forward, your courage in speaking out has exposed one of the largest civil rights violations in modern American history. Your testimony will help ensure that systematic discrimination cannot hide behind the facade of corporate security training. Maya looked around the hearing room at the dozens of victims, federal investigators, journalists, and congressional staff who had gathered to address the conspiracy she had unknowingly exposed. She realized that her assault at First National Bank had become a catalyst for civil rights reform that would affect millions of Americans. But she had no idea that her testimony was about to trigger congressional investigations into discriminatory practices in federal agencies, state governments, and even law enforcement departments across the country. 6 months after Maya Washington was assaulted at First National Bank, she sat in the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., watching the opening statements in United States versus Strategic Advantage Corporation, et al., the largest civil rights trial in American corporate history. Federal prosecutor Maria Santos approached the jury with photographs of Maya's assault, security footage from dozens of other discrimination incidents, and financial records showing Strategic Advantage's systematic profiteering from civil rights violations. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Prosecutor Santos began, the evidence will show that the defendants operated a criminal conspiracy designed to systematically violate the civil rights of American citizens while generating hundreds of millions of dollars in corporate profits. She displayed a timeline on the courtroom screens showing 12 years of documented discrimination. Strategic Advantage Corporation didn't just train security personnel to be more effective, they trained them to discriminate. They taught thousands of people to target customers based on race, age, and demographic assumptions, then charged businesses premium fees for this advanced security training. Maya watched as Prosecutor Santos showed the jury video recordings of Strategic Advantage's training sessions, where instructors explicitly taught security guards to profile customers based on racial and economic stereotypes. You will hear testimony from Detective Maya Washington, a decorated police officer who was assaulted while conducting routine banking business because Strategic Advantage's training taught security personnel that confident black women were inherently suspicious. You will hear from Dr. Patricia Williams, a heart surgeon who was detained while trying to save a patient's life because Strategic Advantage's protocols taught hospital security that black women couldn't be legitimate doctors. The prosecutor displayed financial records on the courtroom monitors. The defendants generated over $400 million in revenue from their discriminatory training programs. They measured their success not by reducing actual crime or improving legitimate security, but by reducing what they called undesirable customer interactions, corporate language for discriminating against minority customers. Maya observed the defendants sitting at the defense table: Richard Blackwood, CEO of Strategic Advantage Corporation; Jennifer Morrison, Head of Training Development; Michael Chang, Regional Operations Director, and 14 other executives who had designed and implemented the discriminatory training programs. Defense attorney Robert Sterling stood to present the opening statement for Strategic Advantage Corporation. Ladies and gentlemen, my clients are security professionals who developed training programs designed to protect businesses and customers from legitimate threats. The isolated incidents described by the prosecution do not constitute systematic discrimination, but rather individual mistakes by personnel who misapplied otherwise legitimate security protocols. Maya felt her jaw tighten as Sterling attempted to characterize the assault she experienced as an isolated incident, despite overwhelming evidence of systematic patterns. Sterling continued, Strategic Advantage Corporation provided security training to over 1,500 businesses because their methods were effective at reducing theft, fraud, and security incidents. The prosecution wants you to believe that effective security is somehow equivalent to racial discrimination. But the evidence will show that my client's training programs focused on behavior, not demographics. Federal Judge Patricia Chen called a brief recess, and Maya stepped outside the courtroom with Agent Walsh and Prosecutor Santos. The media presence was overwhelming, with reporters from national networks covering every aspect of the trial. Detective Washington, how are you holding up? Agent Walsh asked. Maya looked back at the courthouse, where her case was now the centerpiece of a historic civil rights trial. Agent Walsh, it's surreal. 8 months ago, I was just trying to deposit my grandmother's inheritance check. Now I'm a witness in a federal trial that could change civil rights law. Prosecutor Santos reviewed her notes for the afternoon session. Detective Washington, your testimony is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Are you prepared? Maya had spent weeks preparing for this moment. Ms. Santos, I'm ready. I want the jury to understand that what happened to me wasn't an isolated incident or a misunderstanding. It was the predictable result of systematic training that taught Brad Thompson to view people like me as criminals. When court resumed, the prosecution began presenting evidence of Strategic Advantage's systematic discrimination. FBI computer specialists testified about internal emails, where executives celebrated their success at reducing minority customer interactions for client businesses. Agent Walsh took the stand to present the scope of the investigation. Your Honor, the FBI identified over 50,000 documented incidents of discrimination by personnel trained through Strategic Advantage's network. We found evidence of discriminatory practices at banks, retail stores, hospitals, restaurants, and even government buildings. She displayed a map showing the geographic distribution of incidents. The discrimination wasn't random or isolated. It followed specific patterns consistent with Strategic Advantage's training protocols. Personnel trained by the defendants demonstrated remarkably similar behavior when interacting with minority customers using identical language and escalation techniques across hundreds of different businesses. The defense attorneys attempted to challenge the evidence, arguing that correlation didn't prove causation and that individual security guards were responsible for their own actions. But the prosecution's evidence was overwhelming. Internal documents, training videos, and financial records that demonstrated systematic intent to discriminate. Maya watched the proceedings with the analytical mind of a detective, observing how federal prosecutors methodically built their case using evidence she had helped collect during the months-long investigation. As the first day of trial concluded, Maya realized that her assault at First National Bank had become the foundation for a legal precedent that would affect civil rights law for generations to come. Outside the courthouse, she was approached by reporters asking for her reaction to the opening statements. The evidence presented today shows that my assault wasn't the result of one security guard's prejudice, Maya told the cameras. It was the predictable outcome of a corporate conspiracy that trained thousands of people to discriminate against Americans based on race and demographic assumptions. Tomorrow I'll testify about what I experienced, but more importantly, I'll represent the voices of thousands of victims who deserve justice. As news crews broadcast coverage of the trial across the country, Maya prepared for the most important testimony of her career, testimony that would determine whether systematic discrimination could be disguised as corporate security training, or whether civil rights laws would be enforced against companies that profit from prejudice. Maya Washington approached the witness stand in the federal courthouse with the same professional composure she had maintained throughout her ordeal. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, knowing that her testimony would represent not just her own experience, but the voices of thousands of discrimination victims across the country. Federal prosecutor Maria Santos approached the witness stand with respectful formality. "Detective Washington, please state your name and occupation for the record." "My name is Detective Maya Washington. I am a 6-year veteran of the Metropolitan Police Department, currently assigned to the Financial Crimes Division." "Detective Washington, can you describe your experience at First National Bank on the afternoon you were assaulted?" Maya looked directly at the jury, her law enforcement training helping her present clear, factual testimony. "I entered First National Bank to deposit my grandmother's inheritance check and conduct routine banking business. I had been a customer at that branch for 3 years, with a perfect banking history and government payroll direct deposits." She paused, ensuring the jury understood the legitimacy of her business at the bank. "The inheritance check was for $68,000, money my grandmother had saved over 40 years to help her family achieve homeownership. It had been processed by the bank's own estate services department 2 days earlier." Prosecutor Santos presented Maya with photographs from the incident. "Detective Washington, can you identify what's happening in these images?" Maya studied the photographs that had been extracted from witness videos and security cameras. "These images show Brad Thompson, the security guard trained by Strategic Advantage Corporation, physically assaulting me while I attempted to conduct legitimate banking business." She pointed to specific moments in the photographic sequence. "Here you can see him grabbing my arms and forcing me against the ATM wall. Here he's attempting to force me to the ground while claiming I was under citizen's arrest for bank fraud. Despite the fact that my banking relationship was legitimate, my check was legitimate, and my identity could have been verified in 30 seconds. Detective Washington, based on your law enforcement training, how would you characterize Mr. Thompson's behavior?" Maya's voice carried the authority of her professional experience. "Mr. Thompson's behavior followed a predictable pattern consistent with discriminatory training, rather than legitimate security protocols. He made assumptions about my legitimacy based on demographic profiling, escalated a routine transaction into a physical confrontation, and ignored multiple forms of evidence that contradicted his prejudicial assumptions." Prosecutor Santos displayed Strategic Advantage's training materials on the courtroom monitors. "Detective Washington, having reviewed the training materials used by Strategic Advantage Corporation, do you see connections between Mr. Thompson's actions and the content of these training programs?" Maya studied the training documents projected for the jury. "Yes, absolutely. The training materials specifically instruct security personnel to view confidence levels inconsistent with demographic expectations as evidence of fraudulent activity. Mr. Thompson told me that my demographic profile was inconsistent with the inheritance check amount, language that appears verbatim in Strategic Advantage's training manual." She continued her analysis. "The training materials also instruct personnel to trust their instincts about customer demographics and to view entitled behavior from certain backgrounds as suspicious. Mr. Thompson's actions followed these discriminatory guidelines precisely. Detective Washington, how did your law enforcement training influence your response to being assaulted?" Maya looked directly at the defendant's table, her voice steady and professional. "My training taught me to de-escalate situations and preserve evidence. I chose not to resist physically because I understood that Mr. Thompson's assault was being recorded by multiple witnesses, and that documentation would be more valuable than retaliation." She paused, ensuring the jury understood the significance of her restraint. "I also spoke clearly to the witnesses who were recording, stating my name, badge number, and the legitimacy of my banking business. I wanted to ensure that when this incident was investigated, there would be no ambiguity about what happened or why." Prosecutor Santos approached the witness stand with bank documents. "Detective Washington, these are your banking records from First National Bank. Can you describe your relationship with this institution?" Maya reviewed the documents. "These records show 3 years of consistent banking, government payroll deposits, excellent credit standing, and 0 irregularities. I was not an unknown customer. I was a valued client with a documented history of legitimate banking relationships. Detective Washington, in your professional opinion as a law enforcement officer, could Mr. Thompson have verified your identity and the legitimacy of your transaction without resorting to physical assault? Maya's response was immediate and definitive. Absolutely. Basic banking security protocols require verification of customer identity and transaction legitimacy before any confrontation occurs. Mr. Thompson could have asked to speak with a bank manager, checked my banking history in the computer system, or called the estate services department that had processed my inheritance check. She leaned forward, addressing the jury directly. Instead, he chose to assume that a young black woman couldn't legitimately possess an inheritance check worth $68,000, and he escalated immediately to physical assault based purely on demographic profiling. Prosecutor Santos concluded her direct examination. Detective Washington, what impact has this experience had on your life and career? Maya considered the question carefully. The immediate impact was professional and personal humiliation. Being assaulted while conducting legitimate business is traumatic, regardless of one's occupation. But the broader impact has been the realization that my experience represents the experiences of thousands of Americans who face discrimination disguised as security protocols. She looked around the courtroom at the victims, investigators, and journalists who had gathered for this historic trial. This case isn't just about what happened to me at First National Bank. It's about a systematic conspiracy to violate civil rights while generating corporate profits. My testimony today represents the voices of every person who has been discriminated against by personnel trained through Strategic Advantages Network. Defense attorney Robert Sterling approached for cross-examination, attempting to characterize Maya's experience as an unfortunate misunderstanding rather than systematic discrimination. But Maya's law enforcement training and comprehensive preparation made her testimony unshakable. After 2 hours of testimony, Maya stepped down from the witness stand, knowing that she had presented clear, professional evidence of the systematic discrimination that had been operating under the facade of corporate security training. As she returned to the gallery, Maya saw the faces of other victims who would testify in the coming weeks, faces that represented the thousands of Americans who had been discriminated against by a corporate conspiracy that measured success by how effectively it could violate civil rights while avoiding legal accountability. The trial would continue for 6 more weeks, but Maya's testimony had established the foundation for proving that Strategic Advantage Corporation had operated a criminal conspiracy to systematically discriminate against American citizens while generating hundreds of millions in corporate profits. After 8 weeks of testimony, evidence presentation, and legal arguments, the federal jury in United States versus Strategic Advantage Corporation reached their verdict. Maya Washington sat in the packed courtroom as Judge Patricia Chen prepared to announce the decision that would determine whether corporate-sponsored discrimination would be held accountable under federal law. The courtroom was filled with victims who had testified, FBI agents who had investigated the conspiracy, civil rights attorneys, journalists from national networks, and observers from advocacy organizations who understood the historic significance of this case. Judge Chen addressed the packed courtroom. Ladies and gentlemen, this case represents one of the most comprehensive examinations of systematic civil rights violations in American corporate history. The jury has deliberated for 18 hours over 3 days, carefully reviewing evidence of discriminatory training programs, corporate financial records, and testimony from hundreds of victims. Maya felt the weight of representing thousands of discrimination victims as Judge Chen prepared to announce the decision that would determine whether corporate-sponsored discrimination would be held accountable under federal law. Judge Chen looked at the jury foreman, a retired teacher who had spent 6 weeks analyzing evidence of systematic civil rights violations. Has the jury reached a verdict in the matter of United States vs. Strategic Advantage Corporation? The foreman stood, holding the verdict forms that would reshape civil rights law in America. Yes, Your Honor, we have. On the charge of conspiracy to violate civil rights under federal statute, how do you find the defendant Strategic Advantage Corporation? Guilty, Your Honor. The word guilty echoed through the federal courthouse like a thunderclap. Maya felt tears of relief and vindication streaming down her face as the courtroom erupted in applause from hundreds of victims who had waited years for this moment. Judge Chen restored order with her gavel. On the charge of racketeering under the RICO Act, how do you find the defendant Strategic Advantage Corporation? Guilty, Your Honor. On the charge of wire fraud in connection with systematic discrimination training programs, how do you find? Guilty, Your Honor. Judge Chen continued through 47 separate counts against Strategic Advantage Corporation and its network of subsidiary companies. Each guilty verdict represented thousands of victims who had been discriminated against by corporate-sponsored training that taught security personnel to target customers based on race and demographic assumptions. The individual defendants, CEO Richard Blackwood, Training Director Jennifer Morrison, and 15 other executives who had designed and implemented the discriminatory programs, were found guilty on multiple federal charges, carrying sentences of up to 20 years in prison. Maya watched Richard Blackwood's face as the verdicts were announced. The man whose company had trained Brad Thompson to assault her sat motionless as his criminal empire collapsed under the weight of federal justice. Judge Chen addressed the defendants before announcing sentencing. The evidence presented in this case reveals one of the most systematic violations of civil rights in modern American corporate history. The defendants operated a criminal conspiracy that generated over $400 million in revenue by teaching thousands of people to discriminate against their fellow Americans. She continued, her voice carrying the full authority of federal law. This court finds that the defendants' actions were not isolated mistakes or individual prejudices, but deliberate, systematic, and profitable violations of the constitutional rights of American citizens. The systematic nature of these violations demands sentences that reflect both the scope of the crimes and the need to deter similar conspiracies. Maya held her breath as Judge Chen announced the sentences that would send a message to every corporation considering discriminatory practices as a business model. Richard Blackwood, CEO of Strategic Advantage Corporation, this court sentences you to 18 years in federal prison and orders restitution of $200 million to be distributed among the victims of your conspiracy. The sentence was unprecedented for corporate civil rights violations. Maya watched as federal marshals prepared to take Blackwood into custody immediately. Jennifer Morrison, head of training development, this court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison for designing and implementing systematic discrimination training that violated the civil rights of hundreds of thousands of Americans. Judge Chen continued through the sentences for all 17 defendants, imposing prison terms ranging from 8 to 18 years and ordering complete restitution to victims whose lives had been damaged by corporate-sponsored discrimination. Strategic Advantage Corporation and its network of subsidiary companies are hereby ordered to cease all operations, forfeit all assets, and pay damages totaling $800 million to victims of their discriminatory practices. Maya realized that the corporate conspiracy that had trained Brad Thompson to assault her was being completely dismantled by federal justice. The company would no longer exist, its executives would spend decades in prison, and its victims would receive financial compensation for the discrimination they had endured. But the verdicts represented more than individual justice. They established legal precedent that would affect civil rights law for generations. Judge Chen addressed the packed courtroom. This case demonstrates that systematic discrimination cannot hide behind corporate training programs or security protocols. When companies profit from violating civil rights, when they teach employees to target customers based on race and demographics, when they measure success by reducing minority customer interactions, they will be prosecuted under the full extent of federal law. Maya stood as Judge Chen concluded the proceedings, feeling the weight of history and the satisfaction of justice achieved through legal process rather than retaliation. Outside the courthouse, she was surrounded by reporters asking for her reaction to the historic verdicts. Today, a federal jury sent a clear message that systematic discrimination will not be tolerated in American business, Maya told the cameras. The verdicts in this case represent justice not just for me, but for the hundreds of thousands of Americans who have been victimized by corporate-sponsored prejudice. She looked directly into the news cameras, speaking to discrimination victims across the country. 8 months ago, I was assaulted at First National Bank because someone trained by Strategic Advantage Corporation assumed that a young black woman couldn't legitimately conduct banking business. Today, that company no longer exists. Its executives are going to federal prison, and its victims will receive compensation for the injustice they endured. Maya paused, ensuring her words carried the weight of the historic moment. This case proves that when Americans stand up against discrimination, when witnesses document injustice, when federal investigators pursue systematic violations, the law will protect our civil rights and hold corporations accountable for their actions. As news crews broadcast coverage of the verdicts across the country, Maya realized that her assault at First National Bank had resulted in the largest civil rights victory in modern American corporate history. But she had no idea that the Strategic Advantage convictions were about to trigger a wave of civil rights reforms that would reshape how American businesses train their personnel and interact with minority customers nationwide. 1 year after the Strategic Advantage verdicts, Maya Washington stood in the Rose Garden of the White House as President Anderson signed the Corporate Civil Rights Accountability Act, federal legislation directly inspired by her case that required transparency in security training programs and criminal penalties for executives who implement discriminatory policies. Today, we ensure that what happened to Detective Maya Washington can never happen again. President Anderson announced to the assembled crowd of victims, investigators, and civil rights leaders. The Corporate Civil Rights Accountability Act establishes federal oversight of security training programs, creates a national database of discrimination incidents, and makes corporate executives personally liable for systematic civil rights violations. Maya watched as the president signed legislation that would affect millions of American workers and customers. The law required all companies providing security or customer service training to submit their materials to the Department of Justice for civil rights review, imposed mandatory penalties on businesses with patterns of discriminatory incidents, and created whistleblower protections for employees who reported discriminatory practices. After the signing ceremony, Maya was approached by Deputy Attorney General Sandra Chen, who had overseen the Strategic Advantage prosecution. "Detective Washington, I want to offer you a position with the Department of Justice's newly created Corporate Civil Rights Division. We need experienced investigators who understand both law enforcement and civil rights violations." Maya considered the offer carefully. "Ma'am, what would this position involve?" "You would lead federal investigations into corporate discrimination, train FBI agents on identifying systematic civil rights violations, and work with Congress on additional civil rights legislation. Essentially, you would help ensure that the Strategic Advantage conspiracy never happens again." The offer represented a career change that would take Maya from local financial crimes to federal civil rights enforcement. "Deputy Attorney General Chen, I'm honored by the offer. When would I need to make a decision?" "Take your time, Detective Washington. But I hope you'll consider using your experience to help other victims achieve the justice you fought for." Meanwhile, the impact of the Strategic Advantage convictions was being felt across American business. Over 300 companies that had used Strategic Advantage's discriminatory training programs were implementing new civil rights policies, retraining their personnel, and compensating customers who had experienced discrimination. First National Bank, where Maya's ordeal began, had become a model for civil rights compliance in the banking industry. Patricia Wells, the branch manager, approached Maya during a community event celebrating the new federal legislation. "Detective Washington, I wanted to personally apologize for what happened at our bank and tell you about the changes we've made," Patricia said. "We've implemented comprehensive civil rights training for all employees, established a customer advocacy program, and created partnerships with community organizations to ensure inclusive banking services." Maya accepted the apology graciously. "Ms. Wells, I appreciate your efforts to prevent future incidents. The changes at First National Bank show that businesses can learn from their mistakes and become better community partners." Patricia continued, "Detective Washington, we'd like to offer you and your family premium banking services for life, and we want to establish a scholarship program in your name to support young people pursuing careers in law enforcement and civil rights. The scholarship program was one of hundreds of initiatives inspired by Maya's case. Universities across the country were establishing civil rights programs, corporations were hiring diversity and inclusion officers, and community organizations were training citizens to recognize and document discrimination. Dr. Patricia Williams, the cardiac surgeon, who had testified in the Strategic Advantage trial, approached Maya at the White House event. "Detective Washington, I wanted to thank you for your courage in pursuing this case. Because of your willingness to speak out, I no longer face discrimination when I enter hospitals. The systematic changes in healthcare security have made it possible for minority medical professionals to do our jobs without fear of being profiled." Maya felt the satisfaction of knowing that her ordeal had created positive change beyond her individual case. Dr. Williams, seeing the systematic changes in healthcare gives me hope that we're making real progress in eliminating institutional discrimination. Michael Chen, the software engineer from the congressional hearings, had started a non-profit organization called Documentation for Justice that trained community members to safely record discrimination incidents and connect victims with legal resources. Detective Washington, your case taught us that documentation is crucial for exposing systematic discrimination, Michael told Maya. Our organization has trained over 50,000 people to safely record discrimination incidents, and we've helped hundreds of victims connect with legal representation. Maya was amazed by the grassroots activism her case had inspired. Michael, the work you're doing ensures that future victims won't face discrimination alone. Community documentation and support networks are essential for protecting civil rights. The ripple effects of the Strategic Advantage case extended internationally as well. European Union regulators were examining American corporate training practices, and human rights organizations were using the case as a model for identifying systematic discrimination in other countries. Agent Jennifer Walsh, who had led the FBI investigation, approached Maya with an update on the broader impact of their work. "Detective Washington, we've identified and shut down 12 other companies that were operating discrimination schemes similar to Strategic Advantage. Your case created legal precedent that allows us to prosecute systematic civil rights violations as federal conspiracies." Maya realized that her assault at First National Bank had created a legal framework for prosecuting institutional discrimination that previously had been difficult to prove in court. "Agent Walsh, how many additional victims have been helped by the precedent established in our case?" "We estimate that over 200,000 Americans have benefited from civil rights enforcement actions that were made possible by the Strategic Advantage convictions. Your case literally changed how we investigate and prosecute systematic discrimination." As the White House event concluded, Maya reflected on the transformation that had occurred since she walked into First National Bank to deposit her grandmother's inheritance check. What had begun as a personal assault had evolved into a national civil rights movement that was reshaping American business practices and protecting millions of citizens from systematic discrimination. But Maya had no idea that her most important contribution to civil rights progress was still ahead of her. 5 years after her assault at First National Bank, Director Maya Washington of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Civil Rights Division stood before a packed auditorium at Howard University Law School, delivering the keynote address at the National Civil Rights Enforcement Conference. Maya had accepted the Department of Justice position and had been promoted twice, ultimately leading the federal government's efforts to prevent and prosecute systematic discrimination in American business. Her division had investigated over 800 cases of corporate civil rights violations and secured convictions against 43 companies using discriminatory practices similar to Strategic Advantage Corporation. 5 years ago, I walked into a bank to deposit my grandmother's inheritance check, Maya began, her voice carrying the authority of her federal leadership position. I was assaulted by a security guard who had been trained to view people like me as inherently suspicious. That assault exposed a systematic conspiracy that violated the civil rights of hundreds of thousands of Americans. The audience of law students civil rights attorneys and federal investigators listened intently as Maya described the transformation that had occurred since the Strategic Advantage case. Today, federal law requires transparency in all security training programs. Companies can no longer hide discriminatory policies behind corporate training manuals. We have prosecuted systematic discrimination as federal conspiracy, and we have established legal precedent that protects Americans from institutional prejudice disguised as business policy. Maya displayed statistics showing the impact of federal civil rights enforcement since her case established new legal precedents. In the past 5 years, the Corporate Civil Rights Division has secured over $2 billion in compensation for discrimination victims. We have shut down 67 companies operating systematic discrimination schemes. And we have trained over 100,000 business personnel in proper civil rights compliance. She paused, looking out at the diverse audience of future civil rights attorneys. But the most important impact of our work is not measured in prosecutions or financial settlements. It's measured in the young black woman who can enter a bank without fear of assault, the Latino professional who can shop without being followed by security, the Asian American family who can eat at a restaurant without being questioned about their legitimacy. Maya clicked to her next slide, showing photographs of victims who had achieved justice through civil rights enforcement actions inspired by her case. Each of these faces represents an American whose civil rights have been protected because witnesses decided to document injustice, because federal investigators pursued systematic violations, and because juries held corporations accountable for discriminatory practices. During the question and answer session, a law student asked Maya about her decision to pursue federal civil rights work rather than returning to local law enforcement. When I was assaulted at First National Bank, I learned that individual incidents of discrimination are often symptoms of systematic problems that require systematic solutions, Maya replied. Local law enforcement can address individual crimes, but federal civil rights enforcement can dismantle the corporate conspiracies that create those crimes. She continued, "My role now is to prevent what happened to me from happening to other Americans. We investigate companies before they implement discriminatory training. We prosecute executives who design systematic civil rights violations, and we create legal precedent that protects future generations from institutional discrimination." Another student asked about the international impact of American civil rights enforcement. The Strategic Advantage case has influenced civil rights law internationally, Maya explained. European Union regulators now examine corporate training practices for discriminatory content. Human rights organizations use our legal precedents to challenge systematic discrimination in other countries. And American companies operating internationally are required to apply our civil rights standards to their global operations. After her keynote address, Maya was approached by Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, the retired teacher who had recorded her assault at First National Bank and whose viral video had exposed the discrimination conspiracy. Director Washington, Mrs. Hartwell said with a smile, "I wanted to see how far you've come since that terrible day at the bank." Maya embraced the woman whose courage to document injustice had made federal prosecution possible. "Mrs. Hartwell, your decision to record what happened to me changed civil rights law in America. Every victim who has achieved justice since then owes a debt to your courage." Mrs. Hartwell, now 83 years old, remained actively involved in civil rights advocacy. "My dear, I've been training community groups to safely document discrimination incidents. We've taught over 10,000 people to be effective witnesses when they see injustice." Maya was continually amazed by the grassroots activism her case had inspired. Mrs. Hartwell, community documentation remains crucial for civil rights enforcement. Professional investigators can't be everywhere, but informed citizens can witness and document discrimination in real time. James Morrison, the corporate attorney who had witnessed Maya's assault and provided legal support during the investigation, approached with an update on civil rights compliance in the business community. "Director Washington, I've been tracking corporate compliance with the new federal requirements," James reported. "Over 90% of companies are now submitting their training materials for civil rights review, and discrimination incidents have decreased by 68% in businesses that have implemented comprehensive civil rights training. Maya felt satisfaction, knowing that systematic changes were protecting Americans from discrimination. James, those statistics represent millions of people who can conduct business, seek employment, and interact with security personnel without fear of being targeted based on their race or demographics. Dr. Patricia Williams, the cardiac surgeon who had been discriminated against at her own hospital, had established the Strategic Advantage Memorial Fund, which provided legal representation for discrimination victims and funded civil rights research at major universities. Director Washington, our fund has helped over 2,000 discrimination victims achieve justice, Dr. Williams reported. We've also funded research that has identified new patterns of systematic discrimination and developed training programs that help businesses create truly inclusive environments. Maya realized that the network of activism, legal reform, and community advocacy inspired by her case had created permanent change in American civil rights enforcement. Dr. Williams, the work you've done shows that victims can become advocates who prevent future discrimination. Your leadership has created lasting change that will protect Americans for generations. As the conference concluded, Maya reflected on the transformation that had occurred since Brad Thompson assaulted her at First National Bank. What had begun as a personal ordeal had evolved into federal legislation, corporate reform, international civil rights precedent, and grassroots activism that was reshaping how Americans understood and enforced their civil rights. Maya's grandmother's inheritance check, intended to help her buy her first home, had instead helped her build a legacy of civil rights protection that would benefit millions of Americans. The money had long since been deposited, the house had been purchased, but the impact of that day at First National Bank would continue protecting civil rights for generations to come. In her final remarks to the conference, Maya addressed the future of civil rights enforcement in America. The work is not finished, she told the assembled advocates, attorneys, and investigators. Systematic discrimination continues to evolve. Corporations continue to find new ways to profit from prejudice, and Americans continue to face institutional barriers based on race, ethnicity, religion, and economic status. She looked out at the faces of future civil rights leaders. But we have established legal precedent that makes systematic discrimination prosecutable as federal conspiracy. We have created enforcement mechanisms that can dismantle corporate discrimination before it harms victims, and we have inspired communities to document, witness, and challenge injustice wherever they encounter it. Maya paused, thinking of the 12 customers who had recorded her assault and the courage they had shown in standing up for a stranger's civil rights. 5 years ago, 12 people with smartphones decided that injustice was worth documenting. Their decision to act, to record, to stand up for what was right, created a federal civil rights case that has protected hundreds of thousands of Americans from systematic discrimination. She concluded with a challenge to the next generation of civil rights leaders. Your responsibility is to continue this work, to investigate new forms of discrimination, to prosecute systematic violations wherever you find them, and to ensure that every American can exercise their civil rights without fear of institutional prejudice. As Director Maya Washington left the stage to thunderous applause, she carried with her the knowledge that her assault at First National Bank had created a permanent expansion of civil rights protection in America, a legacy that would prevent discrimination, prosecute violators, and empower communities to protect each other's constitutional rights for generations to come. Thank you to everyone who typed justice and shared your locations from around the world. Your voices create change, and together we make justice undeniable. If this story inspired you to stand up against discrimination, please like this video, subscribe to Undeniable Tales, and share Maya's story to help more people understand the power of witnesses with courage. What would you have done if you witnessed Maya's assault?